A while ago, I saw this guy on Reddit, BBBN19, post this short video showcasing a melting lava effect using dynamic paint. Of course, I was intrigued by this, so I set forth to recreate it using a mixture of dynamic paint and incorporating some fluid simulation in there as well. This is what I got and what we will be creating in this tutorial. This tutorial is going to be somewhat intermediate and we'll be working with fluid simulation, dynamic paint, and some material nodes as well. I would recommend watching my full guide to dynamic paint tutorial as well as my MantaFlow tutorial playlist before hopping into this. However, given that both of those combined take up quite a bit of time, you don't have to do it. It's just a bit of a recommendation. So without any further ado, let's hop into Blender and get started. The first thing you need is a mesh to destroy with this lava. This mesh should have a decent amount of vertices as we will be applying a displacement modifier for the melting effect. This mesh also needs to have a good UV map. Now that we've got that in there, we need some fluid. Let's throw in a sphere for that and animate it moving above our mesh. Enable fluid on that and make it a liquid inflow object. For a domain, add in a cube and make that a domain with the type set to liquid. We want this to act like lava, so we need some viscosity in our fluid settings. For this, we need a high base and a low exponent. I used a value of 6 and 1 for those respectively. Let's also add in a bit of surface tension. I used a value of 0.25. Remember to make your melting object and effector object set to collision. Then, bake the simulation and bake the mesh as well. Great, now let's start with some dynamic paint. We'll want to use that fluid we just simulated as our brush and use the object as our canvas. There are a few things we'll want to change under our canvas settings once we have enabled both of those. We'll need to switch from vertex mode over to using an image sequence as the displacement modifier doesn't allow vertex groups. We'll also want a decent resolution on our image texture, so I'll set that to 512. Next, we'll want to enable drip under the effects menu. This will allow a bit of runoff in the dynamic paint. This will also let you influence your dynamic paint through force objects if you want. Let's go down to the options for the image sequence. Make an output folder for this, and make sure that your dynamic paint textures will be the only thing in this folder. It makes things a lot easier later on if you stay organized now. You may want to use the paint map for things in the future, so I'll leave that enabled unless you are really starved for time, in which case you can just generate the wet map. Hit this button and bake out that image sequence. Once your image sequence is baked, go to your Meshes Modifier tab. The modifier we'll be using is a Displace modifier, so add that in and create a new texture for it. In the Texture tab, hit this button to import an image and navigate to the folder where your images were baked to. Click the first one, hold down Shift, and then click the last one to select them all and hit that Import button. These settings should work fine, but turn on auto refresh to force Blender to always update our texture on every frame. Playing through this animation should give a kind of janky result, but that's because we haven't changed the strength and mid-level on our displacement yet. Switch the coordinates to UV and select the UV map for your object in this box. Now we just need to change the strength and mid-level values until it looks good. Unfortunately, our fluid is currently colliding with the outside of the object before the displace modifier is applied, so setting the strength to a negative number to cause the fluid to inset and melt the object will result in parts of the object moving without the fluid moving with it. You can just change the mid-level to make the original object thicker, but that can look a little weird. To fix this issue, we need to bake the fluid simulation again, but we need to make sure that the fluid modifier is the last modifier in the order. By moving this down, we ensure that the fluid will be calculated after all these other modifiers, and doing that will allow the lava to collide with our displaced geometry correctly. Bake the liquid particles and the mesh this last time, and then we'll move on to materials and nodes. Firstly, we can use the wet map as a factor for our mesh. If we add in an image texture and select all the wet map images, we can get an image sequence. We will want to once again turn on auto refresh to have it update every frame, and now we can use that to mix between something like a rock shader and a lava shader. Lava materials aren't that hard. I'd recommend watching CG Matters video on the subject for a laugh and some information on a good procedural lava shader. The materials you use for your objects aren't really the important part. I mainly just want to focus on the methods we can use for mixing. In BBBN19's original video, it looks like he fades the glowing lava material into a darker, cooler lava material over time, likely using the drying effect of dynamic paint or using an offset version of the wet map. Unfortunately for us, that isn't going to work because our fluid is our dynamic paint brush, so anywhere close to where it touches will still be considered wet for our dynamic paint. Mantflow doesn't take heat or cooling into consideration when creating fluid simulations either, so fading the shader to a cooled lava can look really strange, as the fluid will still be moving. Nevertheless, I still want to show you a method that I used to get a sort of okay cooling shader. Move your cursor to the emission sphere with Shift S and add in a new UV sphere. Select the new sphere, then the old sphere, and parent the new one to it with Ctrl P. Now scale the new sphere up a little bit, so that we have a big sphere moving with our emission object. Now hop back over to the material nodes for your fluid. Let's add in a gradient texture and a texture coordinate mapping node combination. Select our second sphere as the object for the texture coordinate and set the output from there to object. I always have the node Wrangler plugin enabled, and you should too, because when that is enabled we can use the Ctrl-Shift shortcut to preview the output directly from a node. Here's what we are getting out of our gradient node. I used the easing type for my gradient after a bit of experimentation, but you might have more success with a different type of gradient depending on how you animated your simulation. You can mess around with the sliders on the mapping node to move this around, and maybe use some color ramps or math nodes for more control after the fact as well. Since we are using the object output from the texture coordinate, it will mix and move this gradient based off of the liquid proximity to the sphere. We can apply this to our base object with another mix shader and just tweak it until it looks good. Using a bit of keyframing on the mapping node can help make this look a bit better too, but as I said before, it's not amazing. So if any of you guys figure out a better method for achieving cooling lava, make sure to leave it in the comment section down below. If this video helped you out, was mildly entertaining, or if it taught you something, then go ahead and like it and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my future tutorials. I would like to thank all my generous patrons over at patreon.com for helping me out with this channel. That's Terry Davis, Susan Uncle, and Atomic Alf. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.